Welcome everyone from our Central Synagogue community. It's so meaningful to be together with you this morning. We'll begin with a prayer for the state of Israel. I'll ask my colleague to put it on the screen. I'll invite you to join it, reading it aloud with me. Our God in heaven, support all who stand on guard protecting Israel. Safeguard and save them from trouble and distress. Bless their actions, hear their prayers and ours, and deliver them. Return all those kidnapped safe and sound to their homes, and strengthen those who protect our Holy Land, soldiers and civilians alike. Amen. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for your continued support of Israel during this time when it is under attack. We're grateful to Michael Koplow, Chief Policy Officer for the Israel Policy Forum, for making time to brief us on the current situation. Michael and the Israel Policy Forum have throughout the years helped us at Central Synagogue understand and support Israel, and we're deeply appreciative that you have continued to do so in this time of crisis. This briefing will last approximately 30 minutes. Michael will share with us an update, and then if there's time, take your questions. You can type your questions into the chat feature on the bottom of this Zoom page. And my colleague Marina will join us at the end of this gathering to facilitate question and answer time. Just wanted to let everyone know we expect Michael to be with us weekly. Next week, for example, on Thursday, but at noon. And invite you to please check our weekly email that goes out to the synagogue on Sunday for details about this briefing and the many other ways we at the synagogue are striving to understand and help Israel. Michael, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Rabbi Salf. Okay, so let me give an update on what's happening. Obviously, since I spoke to Central Synagogue last week, I'm not going to start from the very beginning, but really what we've seen over the past few days and some things to watch out for. And then I'm happy to take questions because I'm sure that people have some. So what we're seeing at the moment is something of a holding pattern where Israel has approximately 360,000 reservists that have been called up, and they are split between the southern border with Gaza and the northern border with Lebanon. The ones on the border with Lebanon, I think everyone is hoping will not be used. The ones on the border with Gaza are almost certainly going to be used. But we have not seen a ground invasion yet. And I think that the reason we haven't seen one is for it's a few reasons. First of all, Israel is still trying to do what it can from the air to make a ground invasion easier, which includes hitting all sorts of Hamas targets from Hamas leadership. And in the past few days, the IDF has killed a number of extremely prominent Hamas military leaders, to Hamas bunkers and tunnels underneath Gaza, to weapons facilities, and all sorts of things that are easier to take out now from the air before sending ground troops in. Second, there is still the ongoing issue of hostages. And, within Israel at the moment, I think that public opinion seems to be of the mind that Israel has to launch a ground operation and has to get rid of Hamas. The hostages are there, but with so many dead Israelis, I don't think for a lot of Israelis that's necessarily the priority. I think people have a larger priority in getting rid of Hamas. For the United States, however, there is this issue of American hostages because there are over 20 Americans being held by Hamas. And part of the reason for the delay is that the U.S. is still trying to buy some time to perhaps have some sort of limited prisoner exchange where some women and younger prisoners are let out of Israeli prisons in return for Hamas releasing hostages who have dual citizenship. And obviously that includes Americans. Third, the United States is cautioning Israel not to go in without a plan for how to exit and for what happens the day after. A lot of the discussion that has been taking place between President Biden when he was there yesterday and Secretary Blinken, who was there earlier in the week, has been about cautioning Israel not to go in without a plan for what happens on the day after. And I think that right now the Israelis in many ways have tunnel vision. They're focused just on the military operation, and the U.S. has been urging the Israeli government to really think things through in a more comprehensive manner before going in, because it's obviously easier to go in than it is to get out. So, and there are also issues of, I should mention, IDF readiness. Many of the reserve units actually do not have proper or adequate equipment, and Israel, I think, is buying some time to get things like helmets and boots and even basic medic supplies to some of these reserve units before they go into Gaza, which is obviously going to be a very difficult operation and a difficult task. So we're seeing the Israeli ground operation not begin yet, even though the anticipation for this has been building, I think, for over a week. I will be surprised if it doesn't happen in the next few days. And while there certainly is a world, I suppose, in which a limited ground operation happens and not a more extensive one, which is the sort of thing that we saw in 2014, when is the last time Israeli ground troops went into Gaza, which was really only 3 kilometers in and was designed to eliminate tunnels. It'll surprise me if we see something that limited. And I do think that some form of ground operation is inevitable, and I think it's going to be a relatively large one. And at this point, it's not a question of whether these ground troops are going to be used, but a question of when Israel is going to launch that phase of an operation. At the same time, we have obviously discussions over humanitarian assistance to Gaza. After President Biden left Israel yesterday, the Prime Minister's office issued a statement saying that Israel was not going to let humanitarian assistance into Gaza from Israeli territory until the hostages were all released, but that it was going to not stand in the way of humanitarian assistance coming into Gaza through the Rafah crossing with Egypt, unless that there were some conditions, unless the humanitarian assistance is going straight to Hamas or seized by Hamas, in which case Israel implied that it would prevent assistance from going in, or perhaps even eliminate convoys that have gone in. But Israel appears now to be willing to allow stuff to come in through the south, and there is a big effort that is gearing up across the border with Egypt on the part of Egypt and Jordan and the UN, Turkey, Qatar, a bunch of other countries, the United States as well, which has committed $100 million addition to what it was giving before, another $100 million for humanitarian assistance to the West Bank and Gaza. So I think that we should start to see humanitarian assistance going in tomorrow or over the weekend. And hopefully that will ease some of the situation inside of Gaza for Palestinians, particularly the ones who were in northern Gaza and who fled to the south. There is also, of course, the ongoing issue of the explosion at the hospital in Gaza. I think, all saw the press coverage that immediately blamed the Israelis. It seems, based on not only what the IDF has said, but also what the United States government has said, and also if you've been following some of the independent investigations and kind of open signals intelligence analysts, it seems at this point, if not completely clear, far more certain than not, that the hospital was not struck by an Israeli missile, that it was the result of a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket that fell into the parking lot of the hospital and exploded. People have been questioning how that's possible, given that rockets that are shot into Israel have a very low blast radius. But it seems that this missile, which was shot off pretty close to the hospital, fell pretty quickly, and therefore most of the fuel that fuels the rocket was unspent, which caused a much bigger explosion. This doesn't seem to matter in terms of the impact, because as we've seen, there were immediate protests and riots in various spots around the region against both Israeli diplomatic facilities and American diplomatic facilities. President Biden's scheduled meeting with President Abbas, King Abdullah, and President Sisi was, of course, canceled. So, at this point, it seems that the damage has been done. I think that most people in the region, even if the evidence is clear that it was not an Israeli missile, are inclined to either not believe the evidence or blame Israel anyway, given that Israel is conducting airstrikes in Gaza. So, this has made the regional situation far more volatile. And that is obviously something to keep an eye on, because at some point that may limit what Israel can do, and it also might spark a greater degree of fighting beyond Israel's borders. Third, today, really just in the last few hours, we are seeing signs of escalations, not in Gaza, but on two other fronts. If you, like me, have the Tseva Adom app, the Red Alert app on your phone, so you see when rocket alerts happen and where they are, there have been a number of rocket alerts in northern Israel over the past couple of hours, and there are rockets that are being shot from Gaza and from Lebanon, about 20 rockets that have been shot from Lebanon over the last couple of hours. The initial reports are that those rockets have been shot not by Hezbollah, but by Hamas cells that operate in southern Lebanon. But of course, Hezbollah controls southern Lebanon thoroughly, so any rockets that are being shot there, even if they're not being done by Hezbollah directly, are certainly being done with the knowledge and perhaps approval of Hezbollah. So Israel has been responding, and it seems that things are louder on the northern border at the moment than they really have been in days. And then the second front is the West Bank, and in the West Bank there have been 74 Palestinians shot and killed since October 7th. But today Israel was conducting a raid against either Hamas or Islamic Jihad cells in the Tulkarm refugee camp, ended up coming under fire and launched a drone strike, which killed a number of Palestinians. So, we're seeing in the West Bank where things have been tense and have escalated over the past 12 days, even more so than they have been over the course of this year. Today, we're seeing an uptick in activity, certainly is represented by drone strike and the amount of fire that IDF troops came under when they were in the Tulkarm refugee camp. We've also seen, since the explosion at the hospital, protests in the West Bank, in Ramallah and Jenin and some other places, not only against Israel, but against the Palestinian Authority as well, since many Palestinians view the Palestinian Authority as simply being a partner of Israel or even a subcontractor of Israel's occupation. So the situation is unfortunately heating up in a number of places, and that's even before we have a ground invasion in Gaza, which I think is going to, of course, raise the temperature on everything. So that is the update as to what's going on. Unfortunately, it's not an optimistic update, and I fear that we're not going to have much good news for a while. But that is the update. And so with that, I am happy to take questions that people have.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael. One of the first questions we have is from our dear friend Ed. He wants to know about the likelihood that the missile was intentionally fired into the hospital so as to blame Israel, inflame passions, and prevent any progress towards hostage release.
I doubt that it was intentional. The rockets that come from Gaza are they're crude and they're notoriously unreliable, which is a good thing for Israel. It's why when rockets are launched from Gaza, there are a number of reasons why there tend to be few Israeli casualties. One is Iron Dome, but a second is that the rockets are not great. And so many of them fall into the sea, many of them fall back into Gaza. Many of them fall into open areas inside of Israel because these are not guided rockets and they have a high failure rate. Islamic Jihad's rockets tend to fail at a much higher rate than Hamas's rockets. By some estimates, between a third and 50% of Islamic Jihad rockets tend to fall again either inside Gaza or into the ocean. So in this instance, Islamic Jihad appears to have fired a volley of rockets at Israel. At least one of them, it looks like probably two, but at least one of them failed almost immediately after launching and fell into the parking lot of the hospital. I haven't seen any evidence that it was intentional. It looks like a rocket failure. And again, it doesn't seem even though it's, from my perspective, fortunate that it was not an Israeli missile, that it was a rocket fired from inside of Gaza. that doesn't negate the fact, as I said before, that whatever the facts are, I think the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, and it seems like the overwhelming majority of other people and states in the region are blaming Israel for it nonetheless. So not a good situation for anybody.
Thank you. We have a question from Katie, and I'm gonna answer it and then also have you answer it. What resources do you recommend we can continue to read through as we sift through the news? And I will say that in addition to Michael's briefings with us this week and next week, we are going to continue to provide Israel programming and Israel resources in our weekly newsletters and additional newsletters. But I want Michael to speak a little bit more to the resources that you recommend.
Your first stop should be news sources that are Israeli, as opposed to reading about it in American news sources. Not because reporters for the Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal are not excellent. Many of them are. But you're always better off, I think, reading the news from the place itself. So in this case, if you like reading your Israeli news in English, I'd recommend Times of Israel, which has excellent reporters, and they report thoroughly, both in terms of quantity and quality. If you have the ability to read the news in Hebrew, and if you do, I'd say do that first. Ynet is an excellent resource. Again, good reporters. They cover everything very very thoroughly. They don't necessarily update actually as often as Times of Israel does, but you are getting the longer pieces directly in Hebrew. And I'd also recommend, if you are on social media, obviously, like journalists here, almost all Israeli journalists are on Twitter, and they tweet constantly, and oftentimes, just like journalists here, they are reporting things on Twitter hours before they actually make it into a newspaper or a website. So I'm friends with many of these journalists, so I don't actually want to give a list for fear of saying one person but not another, or leaving somebody out. But if you go to any of the news websites, whether it's Times of Israel or Ynet or Walla, or if you watch Israeli Channel 12, pick your favorite reporter or reporters. I guarantee you they're on Twitter, and follow them on Twitter, which is a great way to get the news, also both firsthand and quicker than you get it in any other fashion.
I know you spoke a little bit earlier about the hostage situation. Lenny has a question. Do you have any additional updates? And Rabbi Salt also says, like, any additional insights on the hostage situation, releasing the hostages, what Israel might do to encourage this, and so forth.
There, really unfortunately aren't a lot of good options here with regards to the hostages. There's an enormous number of them. Hamas says that they have 200 and that other groups or individuals have 50. But it's possible that the number is actually a little higher than that. And I'm sure they are not all in one place. Hamas is not dumb, and the hostages are probably scattered throughout Gaza. So the numbers of them and the size of Gaza and the fact that they're not all going to be in one spot makes this much harder. I think a lot of times when we're talking about Israeli hostages, the first thing that people in their minds tend to go to is Entebbe, where you had hundreds of people all being held in one very small terminal. That obviously is not the case here. So that makes this more difficult. And then within Israel, you have this, again, it's a terrible situation where the families of the hostages very understandably are in one frame of mind. Their priority is getting their family members back. And so, they want the Israeli government to do everything it can to get them back as the number one priority. A number of the families are angry that the Israeli government yesterday agreed to even allow, or it's not even really allowing, that they agreed to sort of stand aside as humanitarian assistance goes into Gaza from Egypt. They think that Israel should enforce a complete blockade, not only on its border, but on the Egyptian border from anything coming in until the hostages are released. And then on the other hand, you have the Israeli government, which, as I said earlier, has a higher priority at the moment on getting rid of Hamas, and I think that many Israelis are in that same spot too. So, there's a gap here between, I think, where the government is and where most Israelis are versus where the families are. And there's the logistical problem of whether it's even possible to recover the hostages. There are, of course, negotiation efforts that are ongoing. The Qatari effort to get some hostages out, whether it's the foreign nationals or whether it is women and children and the elderly, in return for some of the prisoners in Israeli prisons. That's an offer that Israel rejected because I think it does not want to be at the moment negotiating with Hamas in any way, shape, or form, or even enter into a negotiation that gets dragged out and allows Hamas to retrench and prevents a military operation. So, I wish I had something more positive to say, but it's very difficult to, I think I said this last week as well, it's very difficult for me to see a situation in which certainly all the hostages are returned safe and sound. And, I think it's also not as difficult, but still difficult to see a situation in which, even a significant amount of the hostages are returned safe and sound. As I said, this is a priority at the moment for the United States and for the administration, but there's really only so much that can be done. There is a group of special forces, U.S. special forces that specialize in hostage rescue missions that has been deployed off the coast of Israel just in case. But again, we're talking about an almost impossible rescue situation here, forgetting about the difficulty of infiltrating Gaza with a team like that and just being able to undertake the mission. Again, a huge number of hostages spread out all over the place. I'm just not sure that there's a good way of getting them back, particularly if Israel does not want to negotiate and release thousands of, Hamas is asking for 6,000 Palestinian prisoners. If Israel doesn't want to meet that price, I'm not sure that there's a good option.
We have only a few more minutes, so I guess I'll give you a big question, even though we have a lot of big questions. Deborah asks, to sum it up, she has a long question, but to sum it up, what's the end game? What is the Israeli government looking for an outcome in terms of a full-scale ground invasion? Do you think they want to install the PA in Gaza? What is public opinion about reoccupation of Gaza or a multinational international force in combination with the PA in Israel? So yeah, what is the end game, do you think?
The Israeli government right now doesn't have an end game. I don't think that they even have a military end game, and they certainly haven't really thought yet about what happens the day after, which is one of the things that the administration is trying to push them on. In terms of the military operation, the cabinet has not defined the exact scope or objective of it. What this government has said is that it wants to get rid of Hamas in some way, and it's unclear yet whether that means simply eliminating its military capabilities and killing all the top leadership, which is something that has been said at some point, or if it means going in and rooting out every single Hamas, not only facility, but member, root, and branch, and toppling it from power in Gaza, aside from the question of just its military capabilities. So until the Israeli government decides, there isn't a good answer to the question of what the ultimate objective is. And I suspect that even once the ground invasion starts, part of what the ultimate objective is will shift based on how it is going, based on whether Hezbollah opens up a northern front, based on pressure from the rest of the region. There are just all sorts of variables here that I think make the answer to this unknowable at the moment. And so when we think about, that's a military operation, when we think about what happens on the day after, that's the spot where Israel doesn't even have no answer. I think that they so far haven't even been willing to contemplate it because they are very focused on the military operation itself. There is a range of outcomes some of them I think are better than others. None of them are great. The worst outcome to my mind would be having Israel go and reoccupy Gaza and rule it as the active day-to-day sovereign of Gaza. That would be disastrous for Israel, just in terms of the burden on Israel administratively, from a security perspective, in every single way. I think it would be very bad for Palestinians as well, who have no desire to have Israel running things. I think that as deeply unpopular as Hamas is among Palestinians, there are very few Palestinians in Gaza who would say, we will trade Hamas for an Israeli military occupation. So I think that's far and away the worst of all the options. Bringing the Palestinian Authority back, I think, is the best option, but that really can't be done on day one for all sorts of reasons. Political reasons on the Palestinian side and logistical reasons as well. You can have some sort of interim Palestinian government. That I think is a relatively good option comparative to some of the others, but that's hard to set up. It's not going to just happen organically overnight. You certainly can have a situation where other states come in, Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, maybe even the Saudis, maybe the Turks, maybe the Qataris, there's lots of combinations you could have in theory, but I'm not sure that any of those states, without huge incentives, mostly from the United States, have a desire to do this. Egypt has never wanted to take Gaza back. Why they would want to lend their own people to running Gaza, I don't really see. Again, unless they get enormous financial and other incentives to do so. So that's going to be a heavy lift too. And I think the message in all of this, or the takeaway in all of this, should be that many of us are focused on the military operation, getting rid of Hamas, but I think that actually the larger challenge, and in some ways maybe the challenge that is as consequential, is what happens the day after. And that's where the Israeli government really needs to start thinking about it. This is a spot where the U.S. can and should jump in, given that we are not the ones who have to fight a military operation. We should be doing what we can to help prepare the groundwork for this and figure out what the day after looks like. Because if the Israelis wait until the military operation is done and then say, all right, what happens next? That's going to be a disaster.
Thank you, Michael. On behalf of Central Synagogue, I just want to thank you for taking your time multiple times a day, multiple days a week, and week after week to informing our congregation and our members about what's going on. I want to put in the chat our link, our Central Synagogue website link to We Stand With Israel, where we have resources, recordings, and any updates that you need. And I just want to let you know that if you are attending today, that means you have the Zoom link for our next session with Michael next week on October 26th, Thursday at noon. And so you don't need to re-register, and you'll be getting those reminder emails. And if you have any questions or any concerns, or you need to reach out to clergy, please do. Their doors are always open. And so again, I want to thank you, Michael, for taking this time and for filling us in on the updates for this week.
Thanks, everyone, and I hope that everyone here and all of your relatives and friends and colleagues in Israel stay safe. Thanks a lot.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.